The morning light glinted off Ricky Maron's Canon telephoto lens as he scanned the grounds of Buckingham Palace with the predatory focus of a man whose back was pressed firmly against the wall. Once the darling of London's tabloid scene, Ricky had built his reputation capturing the raw and guarded moments of the rich and famous. His photographs had graced front pages and destroyed careers, earning him both fortune and infamy. In his prime, Ricky had been unstoppable. His notorious shot of a certain duchess in a compromising position with her bodyguard had sold for six figures. The tearful breakdown of a reality star outside a rehab facility had paid for his Chelsea flat. For nearly 2 decades, photo editors had taken his calls at any hour, desperate for whatever explosive image he'd managed to capture. He'd been the king of the paparazzi jungle, feared by celebrities and envied by colleagues. But that was before the industry changed. Before smartphones made everyone a photographer. Before social media democratized celebrity scandal. Before web platforms slashed rates for freelancers while demanding ever more sensational content. Before 3 younger, hungrier photographers had scooped him on major stories in a row, making him look slow and out of touch. Now, at 43, Ricky Maron was dangerously close to becoming as irrelevant as last week's headlines. His editor at the Daily Expose, once eager to publish anything with Maron's byline, now sent his submissions back with cutting notes about lacking impact and missing the moment. Younger photographers snickered behind his back about old-school methods and dinosaur equipment. The whispers in media circles suggested Ricky Maron was finished, a relic of tabloid glory days that would never return. "Move," he growled, shoving past a younger photographer whose press credentials still had that fresh and creased look. The kid stumbled backward, muttering something about professional courtesy. Ricky had left courtesy behind 3 rejected submissions ago. This morning's editor's email still burned in his mind. "These aren't cutting it anymore. Maron, we need exclusive, compelling material, not the same tired shots every other freelancer is shopping around." His rent was 2 months overdue. His camera equipment, once top of the line, was now outdated. The online publication that had once paid him 5 figures for exclusive shots now offered insultingly low rates, citing changing market conditions. He needed something spectacular, something that would put Ricky Maron back on every photo editor's speed dial. That's when he noticed the guard. Bramwell Carriage stood at his post with perfect stillness, a living statue in scarlet and black. His bearskin cap added imposing height to his already tall frame, and his ceremonial rifle was positioned with mathematical precision across his body. To Ricky, he was simply an obstacle, another royal decoration blocking what could be his perfect shot, his redemption, his ticket back to relevance. "Bloody toy soldiers," Ricky muttered, eyeing the guard's immaculate uniform with undisguised contempt, standing around like mannequins while the real work happens around them. "Press credentials must be visible at all times," announced a palace press liaison, a petite woman whose polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "And please remain behind the designated barriers." Ricky ignored her, deliberately obscuring his press pass as he edged closer to the restricted area. The laminated card dangling from his neck had been through as many wars as he had, coffee-stained and creased, but still his passport to the inner circles that ordinary citizens couldn't access. "Sir," the liaison called out, this time directly addressing him, "you need to step back behind the line."
"Been covering the royals since before you were born, love," Ricky replied without looking at her, his London accent thickening with deliberate condescension. "I know where I'm allowed to stand."
From his position near the palace gates, Guard Carriage maintained his forward gaze, but his peripheral vision, honed through years of military training, registered Ricky's encroachment. Behind the ceremonial stillness of his stance lay the mind of a soldier who had served with distinction in Afghanistan, who had led night patrols through hostile territory, who understood that threats often announced themselves through small disciplinary infractions before escalating to something more dangerous. Beneath his scarlet tunic and gleaming brass buttons, Sergeant Bramwell Carriage carried more than just the weight of tradition. The scar that ran along his left shoulder blade was a souvenir from an ambush outside Kandahar during his first deployment, a night when 3 of his unit hadn't made it home. The slight stiffness in his right knee on cold mornings reminded him of the IED that had nearly taken his leg during a routine patrol in Helmand Province. While tourists saw only the ceremonial facade, Carriage's body mapped a geography of service and sacrifice that few civilians could comprehend. Standing motionless for hours required a discipline that Carriage had first learned in the dust and danger of forward operating bases. There, stillness wasn't ceremonial, it was tactical. The difference between being spotted by enemy observers or remaining invisible until the mission could be completed. The same mental techniques that had kept him focused during 18-hour surveillance operations now enabled him to maintain perfect composure despite the summer heat. Despite the curious tourists, despite the increasingly aggressive photographer edging ever closer to the security perimeter. "That photographer is going to cause trouble," murmured an elderly man to his companion as they observed from a respectful distance. Both men wore blazers adorned with military pins and campaign medals, veterans who understood the meaning behind the ceremonial display that tourists came to photograph. His companion, silver-haired but standing with the straight-backed posture of someone who never quite leaves military service behind, nodded. "Different era now, Jeffrey. When we served, there was respect for the uniform regardless of whose shoulders carried it." "Royal convoy approaching from the mall," crackled a voice through several photographers' earpieces. The coded message spread through the press pack like electricity, charging the air with anticipation. "2 minutes out," someone murmured. "Word is the Duke has an unscheduled guest with him, could be that American diplomat everyone's been speculating about." The information triggered an immediate recalculation in Ricky's mind. An unexpected diplomatic appearance meant potential for exactly the kind of exclusive his editor had demanded. If he could capture the right interaction, the right expression between royalty and American politics, especially given the recent tension between the governments, it could be front-page material, career-saving material. Photographers around him were already jockeying for position, the earlier professional decorum dissolving into barely controlled chaos. Telephoto lenses extended like weapons, tripods dug into position, and the muttered profanities increased as everyone sought the premium angles. Ricky surveyed the scene with mounting frustration. The younger photographers had claimed the prime locations, their equipment newer, their connections fresher. Through breaks in the crowd, he calculated a new approach. If he couldn't get a clean shot from his current position, perhaps there was another way. His gaze fixed on a spot that would give him the perfect angle on the palace entrance, a spot currently occupied by guard carriage. "2-car motorcade 30 seconds out," announced another photographer, the information rippling through the crowd and ratcheting the tension higher. Ricky made his decision. Rules, boundaries, and respect for tradition, these were luxuries for those whose careers weren't hanging by a thread. With the single-minded focus that had once made him London's most feared paparazzo, he began moving deliberately toward Carriage's position, his weathered cannon gripped like a weapon. "Moron, get back behind the line," shouted the palace liaison, spotting his movement too late. The royal motorcade's approach sent a visible wave of excitement through the gathering. Security personnel straightened, photographers raised their cameras in anticipation, and the murmur of speculation grew louder. Through the palace gates, the first glimpse of polished black vehicles appeared, their diplomatic flags snapping crisply in the morning breeze. For Ricky, time seemed to compress into a single critical moment. His experienced eye assessed the approaching vehicles, the angle of the sun, the positioning of the other photographers, and the immovable obstacle of guard carriage, whose ceremonial post stood directly between him and what could be the most important photograph of his career. "Move!" he growled under his breath, his frustration crystallizing into anger. "Just bloody move." The first car in the motorcade slowed as it approached the palace entrance. Through the tinted windows, shadowy figures were just becoming visible, figures that could represent Ricky's last chance at professional salvation. But his angle was wrong, his position compromised by the younger photographers who had claimed the prime spots hours earlier. "Damn it," Ricky hissed, desperation overwhelming his judgment. The second car, the one most likely carrying the rumored American diplomat, was now pulling up. Seconds remained before the moment would be lost forever. In that instant, something in Ricky snapped. Years of declining fortunes, of watching younger photographers overtake him, of battling the relentless tide of technological change that had eroded his once lucrative niche, all of it converged into a single reckless decision. "Out of my way," he muttered, and with the practiced speed that had once made him the most feared paparazzo in London, he lunged forward, deliberately driving his shoulder into guard carriage with enough force to displace him from his post. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers, tourists with phones raised froze in shock. Fellow photographers lowered their cameras in disbelief. For a moment, the entire scene seemed suspended in horrified disbelief. Ricky, oblivious to the line he had crossed, seized his moment. His camera whirred in rapid-fire mode, capturing frame after frame of the royal party emerging from the vehicle, the American diplomat's surprise at the waiting press contingent clearly visible on his face. "Got you," Ricky whispered, a grim smile of triumph spreading across his weathered features as he checked his camera's display. The images were perfect, intimate, revealing exactly the kind of unguarded moments that had once made his reputation. But his victory was short-lived. The silence that had fallen over the palace grounds was broken by the voice of the older veteran, Jeffrey, who stepped forward with righteous indignation radiating from every line of his aged but still military bearing. "In all my years," he declared, loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly, "I have never witnessed such a disgraceful display of disrespect to the Queen's Guard." More voices joined in, a chorus of disapproval swelling around Ricky. Security personnel were already moving toward him with purposeful strides, radio communications crackling with urgent reports of the incident. Carriage, meanwhile, had recovered his position with remarkable discipline, resuming his ceremonial stance as if nothing had happened. But those close enough noticed a change, subtle but unmistakable. The set of his jaw had hardened. The stillness of his posture now carried a different quality, not the practiced immobility of ceremony, but the coiled tension of a combat soldier assessing a threat. The two military veterans exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the shift that civilians might miss. "He's not standing ceremonial anymore," murmured Jeffrey's companion. "That's active posture now." "I got the shot," Ricky announced defiantly to the security officer who had demanded his camera. "And you've got no legal right to confiscate my property." His posture remained confrontational, years of pushing boundaries having instilled in him a reflexive resistance to authority. "This is a serious security incident, Mr. Moron," the officer replied, his voice level but carrying unmistakable gravity. "That wasn't some mannequin you shoved, that was an active duty soldier performing his assigned duties." Ricky scoffed, still riding the adrenaline high of capturing what he believed were career-saving images. "Come off it. These guards are tourist attractions, living statues. Don't pretend he's some frontline soldier just because he's wearing a fancy hat." From the edge of the security perimeter, Jeffrey stepped forward, his campaign medals catching the morning light. "That fancy hat, as you call it," he said, each word precisely enunciated with controlled anger, "is a bearskin cap awarded to the Grenadier Guards for their courage at the Battle of Waterloo. It's not a costume, sir. It's a battle honor." Throughout this exchange, guard carriage maintained his post with extraordinary discipline. Though he had resumed his ceremonial stance with perfect precision, close observers might have noticed subtle changes in his bearing. His posture, always regulation perfect, now carried the unmistakable tension of a soldier in assessment mode. A distinguished officer in the full-dress uniform of the Grenadier Guards approached with measured steps. Captain Montgomery, the guard commander, had been alerted to the incident and had come to personally assess the situation. His presence caused a ripple of recognition through the gathered veterans and military-aware onlookers. "Report," he said simply as he reached the security personnel surrounding Ricky. The single word carried the expectation of immediate, comprehensive information. "Physical assault on guard carriage during royal arrival, sir," the lead security officer responded crisply. "Subject is press photographer Ricky Moron. Credentials show multiple prior warnings for boundary violations." Montgomery's gaze swept over the scene, assessing every detail with practiced efficiency. When his eyes met carriage's, a nearly imperceptible nod passed between the men, acknowledgement of discipline maintained under provocation. "Mr. Moron," Montgomery addressed the photographer directly, his voice carrying the quiet authority that commanded combat units, "are you aware of the legal status of the Queen's Guard?" Ricky, still clutching his camera, attempted to maintain his earlier defiance. "They're ceremonial for tourists. Everyone knows that." "Guard carriage," Montgomery called, not turning away from Ricky's service record. For the first time since the incident began, Carriage spoke, his voice carrying the clear precision of military address while maintaining his forward focus and ceremonial stance. Sergeant Bramwell Carriage, sir. Grenadier Guards, 8 years of service. 2 tour in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Specialized reconnaissance and close protection duties with special operations units in classified deployments. The recitation of combat credentials cast the ceremonial uniform in a completely different light. Ricky's dismissive characterization of toy soldiers withered under the reality of active wartime service. Montgomery considered for a moment, then turned his attention to Ricky, whose earlier bravado had given way to growing apprehension. "Your press credentials, Mr. Moron," he stated, not asked. After a brief conversation with Carriage, Montgomery returned to the center of the security perimeter. His bearing had shifted subtly, carrying the formal weight of official declaration. Under standard protocol, he announced, physical interference with a Queen's Guard is grounds for immediate arrest and potential military charges. He paused, letting the seriousness of the situation register. However, in consultation with Guard Carriage, we have determined that an educational approach may be more appropriate in this instance. Guard Carriage, Montgomery announced with formal precision, you have permission to break ceremonial stance and address the situation directly. A ripple of shock ran through those who understood the significance of this directive. The Queen's Guard breaking ceremonial stance was extraordinarily rare, permitted only in cases of emergency, direct threat, or specific command authorization. Back at his post, Guard Carriage remained motionless for 3 perfect seconds, long enough for the weight of protocol to be acknowledged. Then, with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of drill practice, his right boot stamped once on the gravel, the sound cracking through the morning air like a gunshot. The stamp of Carriage's boot echoed across the palace grounds, punctuating the moment when ceremony gave way to something more profound. With military precision, he pivoted 90 degrees, facing Ricky Moron directly. The movement was not the theatrical gesture tourists hoped to provoke, but the disciplined turn of a soldier addressing a situation under orders. "Attention!" Carriage's voice carried the parade ground authority of a combat veteran, causing several former military members in the crowd to instinctively straighten their posture. When he took 3 measured steps forward, his movements reflected not the stiff ceremonial march tourists came to photograph, but the controlled approach of an infantry soldier who had navigated combat zones. "Mr. Moron," Carriage addressed Ricky directly, his voice level but carrying enough authority to slice through the tension. "I am Sergeant Bramwell Carriage of the Grenadier Guards. Before earning the right to stand at this post, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan's Helmand province and 1 in Iraq. My uniform is not a costume. My post is not a tourist attraction. My duty is not a performance." The crowd had fallen into complete silence, cameras fixed on this unprecedented moment. Tourists who had come to London expecting only pageantry and photo opportunities now found themselves witnesses to something far more profound, a rare glimpse behind the ceremonial curtain to the warrior spirit that animated it. American visitors who moments earlier had been posing for light-hearted selfies now stood transfixed, many instinctively straightening their posture in the presence of authentic military bearing. A Japanese tour group that had been chattering excitedly fell into respectful silence, their guide translating in hushed tones. Even the children in the crowd seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their usual restlessness replaced by wide-eyed attention. Ricky, confronted by the reality of the man he had dismissed as a toy soldier, found himself unable to maintain his previous dismissive attitude. The hard shell of cynicism that had been his professional armor for decades began to crack under the weight of Carriage's authoritative presence. For the first time in years, Ricky Moron found himself without a snappy retort or defensive deflection. The cold reality of what he had done, physically assaulting an active duty soldier, began to penetrate the self-justifying narrative he'd constructed. "The bearskin cap you mocked," Carriage continued, "was earned by my regiment at the Battle of Waterloo, where the Grenadier Guards broke Napoleon's Imperial Guard. We have worn it ever since, not as decoration, but as a battle honor." He gestured to his scarlet tunic with a white-gloved hand. "This uniform has been worn by soldiers defending Britain since 1656. Every button, every stripe, every piece of brass represents history written in blood and sacrifice. While I stand ceremonial duty here, Carriage continued, 23 of my fellow guardsmen are currently deployed in active combat zones. 4 are serving with special operations units in locations I am not at liberty to disclose. Last month, we buried Lance Corporal Edward Hayes after an IED attack took his life during his third tour of duty. The personalization of military service, the naming of a fallen comrade, sent a visible ripple through the gathering. This was no longer an abstract discussion about protocol, but a window into the very real sacrifices behind the ceremonial facade. 3 years ago, Carriage said, his voice steady but carrying undeniable emotion, I carried Private Thomas Wilson for 2 miles after our patrol was ambushed. He'd taken shrapnel protecting our unit's interpreter. He now stands guard at Windsor Castle, having earned that honor through blood and courage that you casually dismissed as play acting. Ricky's camera, which he had clutched throughout the confrontation like a talisman, now hung limply at his side. The shots he had sacrificed his professional reputation to capture seemed increasingly hollow against the weight of Carriage's reality. What you see as ceremonial, Carriage explained, his educational tone making the rebuke all the more powerful, is merely the visible face of active duty. When we're not standing guard here, we train in counterterrorism, close protection, and urban warfare. Many of us have faced more danger in combat than most civilians will encounter in a lifetime. Colonel Blackwood stepped forward, adding context that further illuminated the depth of tradition being defended. Every guardsman, he explained to the gathered crowd, must meet combat infantry standards before they can even be considered for ceremonial duty. The precision you see in their drill movements comes from the same discipline that keeps soldiers alive in war zones. Carriage acknowledged the veterans with a respectful nod before returning his attention to Ricky. You physically assaulted a serving soldier to get your photograph, Mr. Maron. In doing so, you demonstrated profound disrespect not just for me, but for every man and woman wearing this uniform, including those currently in harm's way. The gathered press photographers, who had been documenting the entire exchange, captured the stark contrast between Carriage's disciplined bearing and Ricky's increasingly diminished posture. I understand professional pressure, Carriage continued, his tone shifting slightly towards something almost resembling empathy. In Helmand, we operated under pressures you cannot imagine. But we maintained discipline and respect for our mission regardless of those pressures. That is what separates professionals from opportunists. The pointed comparison landed with visible impact. Ricky's expression reflected the dawning realization that his career might well be over, not because he had lost access to royal photo opportunities, but because he had revealed a character that his profession would no longer tolerate. Your photographs were taken through the commission of an assault on a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, Carriage stated with military precision. They represent not journalistic achievement, but a failure to understand the basic respect due to those in uniform. Faced with the full weight of what he had done, not just breaking protocol but assaulting a combat veteran, not just seeking a photograph but disrespecting a tradition of service and sacrifice, Ricky finally found words, though they emerged with difficulty. I didn't understand, he admitted, the swagger gone from his voice. I've been covering royal events for 20 years and never thought about what the uniform really means. That, Carriage responded with quiet authority, is precisely the problem. Your press credentials have been permanently revoked at all royal residencies and events, announced the senior security officer, his tone leaving no room for appeal. The Royal Press Association will receive a full report, and the decision about whether your overall media accreditation should be reviewed rests with them. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating Ricky's professional armor. Not only had he lost access to the royal events that had been his bread and butter, but the manner of that loss would follow him throughout the industry. No publication with any hope of maintaining official access would risk association with him. As security prepared to escort Ricky from the palace grounds, several of the younger photographers approached Captain Montgomery with a request. After a brief consultation, he nodded his permission. Their spokesperson, a photojournalist from one of the more respected Sunday magazines, addressed the gathered crowd. As members of the press who respect both our profession and the institutions we cover, we want to formally apologize to Guard Carriage and the regiment he represents. Mr. Maron's actions do not reflect the standards we uphold. Under escort, Ricky began his walk of shame toward the palace gates. As he passed guard carriage's position, he paused briefly. "I truly didn't understand what the uniform represented," he offered more plea than explanation. Carriage, who had resumed his ceremonial stance with perfect discipline, gave no response. His duty had already been discharged through his authorized address. Further engagement would serve no purpose. His silent vigilance now spoke volumes more than any additional words could convey. As the disgraced photographer disappeared through the gates, Colonel Blackwood approached Captain Montgomery. Their exchange, though brief, carried the mutual respect of men dedicated to the same traditions of service. "Your guard conducted himself with exemplary restraint and professionalism," Blackwood observed. "In my day, the response might have been more direct." Montgomery allowed himself a small smile. "The physical requirements for guard duty haven't changed, Colonel. But we've found that in today's environment, the ability to educate is sometimes more valuable than the ability to intimidate." With Ricky's departure, a subtle transformation occurred among the gathered tourists. What had begun as casual curiosity about ceremonial pageantry had deepened into genuine appreciation for the reality behind the tradition. Parents could be overheard explaining to their children that the guards were real soldiers, not decorative figures. Visitors who had earlier posed for light-hearted photos now stood at a respectful distance, observing with newfound understanding. The front pages that Ricky had so desperately sought to claim would indeed feature photographs from this morning at Buckingham Palace, but they would tell a very different story than he had intended. One about respect, tradition, and the reality behind ceremonial duty that too many had forgotten. What do you think? Would you have seen past the uniform? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget like this video, subscribe to Guards Moments, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an incredible story. Stay tuned for more jaw-dropping real-life encounters, and check out our previous videos appearing on your screen now. We'll see you in the next one.